Welcome back to the DS Incubator. This is the final video about the basic structure of DBT. The three main files that you need to have a DBT project are these, or files and directories. Profiles YAML defines the connections between your DBT project and a database. Then DBT project YAML is the main configuration file where you tell DBT where the files that transform your data live and where the transformed datasets should go. And models is the directory where you typically put the SQL files that define the SQL transformations that you want to your table to undergo. And finally, we'll see that when we run a DBT command, there will be new directories and folders as a consequence of those commands. So let's start first talking about the profiles YAML file. First of all, note that this file typically lives under your user home directory under the hidden file hidden directory .dvd. So there is where it typically lives because typically it connects to databases through secrets, right? Passwords, for example. So in this particular case, I'm not using any password because I'm using a DuckDB database, which is really nice. That not only because it's powerful, but also because it requires very minimum configuration and it can run locally. So I don't need any password to connect to any database. Nicely allows you or me that we are experimenting with DBT to try the tool without committing to paying, for example, for a subscription to any hosted service. Right? So let's walk you now through what these different fields mean. So hello world is just a name that I gave to the profile, and the profile has a target called dev. So here under the dev target, we are using a connection to a DuckDB database. Then that hello world name, you will find it again at the end of this other file, the file called DBT project YAML. That file, those names, by the way, are pretty rigid. You can change them, but then you have to also invoke commands telling which files to look for. So if you just leave the files with these names, then DBT will discover them. They have to have those names and live in the default locations. So profile field maps to the name of the profile defined in the profiles YAML file, right? So if you change that string to something that doesn't really match, so let's say bad, then when you try to run, for example, DBT test, you should see errors there, right? Because there is no profile called hello world bad, right? So if you remove that, then it should work. In this file, you will see a header that mentions the name of the DBT project, versions. So the first version, I believe, is something that you can change to show the evolution of your project, but this one here is one that is more stable. It just refers to the version of DBT that you are running. And then in this middle section, I'm describing directories where first we have the SQL files that define the transformations for our data, and here second, the target directory where the transformed database will go. All right, and that's about it. You can have a lot more in here, but this is the minimum that you need. Now it's time to talk about that models folder. So in that folder, you have typically one or more SQL files. In this case, the contents of the file model.sql is pretty straightforward. It just creates a string called hello world and assigns it to a variable called greeting. But in real life, you would have a lot more stuff going on here. You would select columns and do things from tables that come from your database, transform that, and then DBT will be in charge of applying those transformations to the raw data so that you can then create tables and views in the transformed database. Okay, so now it's time to basically see the same thing on the terminal. So let's do tree. You can see that the structure is pretty simple. Actually, this logs directory there, I think it was generated by when I tried to do DBT test. So I can clean that up So that looks a little cleaner. So now you see that, except for these empty files, which you can ignore because they are only for teaching purposes, the structure of the DBT project, the minimum structure, is extremely small. Okay, just a few files and folders that we have just described. Now that will change, of course, once you do a DBT run, because then the files in SQL, the SQL files in your models folder will be used to transform raw data from your database and move those transformed data sets into the targets directory. So if I do a tree now, you should have here this target directory, which you can see has a bunch of stuff, right? And on top of that, you can do other commands. Remember, with the DBT test to validate the integrity of your database. It should all work. And then DBT docs generate, which we learned about that command in the previous video about the basic usage. And now we can do DBT docs serve, and if my port is available, it should show something here. There you go, which is something that we also covered in the previous video. Okay, so that's all I wanted to show. What we have achieved now is to talk in this last video of the series, to talk about the basic structure of a DBT project, which is basically 2 YAML files and 1 folder with SQL files to transform your data. Thank you very much. I hope you find it useful.